ADP is one of the most valuable tools in your Dynasty League. We will discuss just how much it matters next on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. And it's another Matt Williamson Wednesday. We are answering your mailbag questions. Go follow Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Our first question comes from at Cover2Lou. He wants to know just how valuable and important is ADP when it comes to our dynasty leagues. Matt, why don't you lead us off?
I think it's a great guideline. I mean, you can kind of see the flow of things. You can see different pockets, that, boy, I could probably wait another round to get a tight end here. Or you can see things, where there's wastelands or surpluses, of course. But really the thing I like best about it, and not to brag or anything, but I think I'm smarter than ADP. I mean, whenever I see dynasty ranks or fantasy ranks and redraft, or this is who you should start this week, I'm like, I don't listen to that. This is what I do for a living. I trust myself more than I do others. So if a trade is kind of hit a stumbling block, I might be like, hey, check out ADP. I mean, you're getting the better deal here, dude. So I think that can work in your favor.
Kate?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The most use I get out of ADP, and we talk a lot about ADP on this show. And I mean, we just did a whole series on the Dynasty ADP updates. But I think the best way to utilize ADP data is as a guideline in assessing player value. I think it's super valuable in terms of assessing, where you could maybe start in a trade even. Matt, obviously you mentioned kind of that retrospect of, okay, so maybe you're trying to swindle another dynasty manager, but even if
we'll call it.
It's a game and we're all trying to win here. No shame in that game. But, I do think also if you're kind of at a point where you're looking for a trade and you're kind of looking for a starting point, I think looking at ADP, especially seeing where the trends are indicating these player values are headed versus where they had been in months prior. It can also be a really helpful tool in figuring out a starting point for a trade offer if you're stuck.
Yeah, for me, it's just about grouping players, not so much being tied to, okay, this guy's ranked at wide receiver 6 and this one's ranked at wide receiver 7. I've got to try to move wide receiver 7 for wide receiver 6. It's not like that for me. It's, hey, these are guys that are believed to be similar in value. Of these 4 receivers, which one would I prefer? And that's how I like to use ADP. I think if you're only basing your team and you're only drafting your team based off ADP, you might end up having a lot of value when it comes to ADP, but I got a feeling you're not going to be winning a lot of fantasy football games. And that's ultimately what matters. So I agree with both of you. I think it's a fantastic tool, but you shouldn't be a slave to ADP at all.
100% agree. I do think it's useful in startups and, even to do mocks ahead of your startups. I mean, if you folks out there have never done a startup before, go find ADP, roll a die or something and be like, oh, I ended up with the 7th pick, and start going, okay, it's 7. I'm going to get the choice of this group, give or take. And then the second round, I'm going to have this group. And where do I get my tight end? Where do I get my quarterbacks, et cetera? So I think it's useful that way, for mocking and things like that, or just glancing at it and saying, wow, that guy's really high right now. Maybe I should throw him on the trading block or something along those lines.
Kate, I was going to ask you, how often do you reference ADP when you are trying to trade with an opponent? Because I know that I do it all the time just to try to sway it a little bit more to my favor. How often do you do it?
I do it super often. I will say where I find it the most valuable for me, I think one of the trickiest things is trading players. Breaking down a player into, say I'm breaking down a high value running back and I'm trading for a lower value running back plus. That's kind of easy math. The trickiest math in a dynasty trade for me is when you're trying to trade players of a different position and figuring out the range and the perceived value of those different players. Because obviously, one for one, you can evaluate those players. I know, from a standpoint of ADP, it's not a every league values these players the same way. Obviously, every league's going to be super different. But when I'm trying to trade, let's say, a wide receiver for a similar range running back or a similar range XYZ player, it's a super helpful tool in evaluating, I think just perceived value of these players across different positions because, obviously average draft position data, you are drafting all of these players at the same time. So it does give you an idea of, again, a starting point of a potential one-for-one comparison when you're looking at these different positions.
Matt, any final thoughts before we move on?
Not really. I do think it's a very valuable tool. I think you don't want to be married to it in any way, shape, or form. And every team's different. It shouldn't influence your team build that much. But I think it's very useful and, again, a very good guideline.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about some sleeper tight ends that maybe you should be targeting in your dynasty leagues this offseason. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, we are back here with Matt Williamson and Kate Majuk on a Mailbag Wednesday. This next question from John. He wants to know, who are 2 to 3 late options at tight end that I should be buying this offseason? Kate, why don't you go first?
I'm going to go deep, dark into the depths. Let's start out as gross as we can get here. I'm going to go with Kylen Granson, tight end for the Indianapolis Colts, who, when we got to see, in the very few opportunities we got to see him play with Anthony Richardson, was actually his second favorite target on the field. Now, Shane Steichen, in his first year, obviously, I think all of us were very pleasantly surprised by the offensive output, especially given the fact that, they had to roll with a backup quarterback. They had to adjust their plans pretty quickly, despite the very fast and promising start they got off on. Anthony Richardson's season-ending injury put a stop to all that. But I do think that this offense is one that could favor the tight end position. I happen to like Kylen Granson the best, but honestly, I think you could take a shot on any of these Colts tight ends because there are several. I think you can kind of just have your pick of the lot, whichever, flip a coin, whatever your preference is. I think you should take a shot on one of these. Obviously, you've got Michael Pittman, who's going to hit free agency. I would expect him to come back. But I think from a standpoint of shoot your shot. I think one of these guys has a chance to emerge as the top receiving tight end in this group. And I think the opportunity could be very plentiful.
Matt, who do you got?
That's hilarious, to be honest with you, because I have like 6 or 7 names jotted down, and my deepest, darkest one is Jelani Woods. I mean, kind of out of sight, out of mind, moves extremely well for such a huge human being. I think he has massive untapped potential, which is nothing against the other Colts tight ends. I think he has the highest ceiling, especially as a touchdown producer. So I have some other names, but I just had to throw that one out there after what Kate said, because there is untapped potential in that tight end room, no question. And not to mention, they got a lot out of Dallas Goedert in that same system. So it's not like it's a tight end, a bad environment for tight ends.
I mean, I don't think it's ever a bad idea to target the 6'7" dude running across the middle of the field.
Right. They can run. Yeah.
Who else you got, Matt?
A couple others. I like both the Packers tight ends. I know Musgrave is borderline for this. He's not a super sleeper or anything along those lines, but I still think the best is yet to come. I also put Likely on here, and I know Andrews coming back clouds things, but I think you're going to see a lot of 12 personnel. I also think that he's a year or two away from being a big-time starter with Baltimore or elsewhere. We weren't doing shows at the time, but I had really had an infatuation with Chigakonkwo. I mean, this is a receiving threat, and nothing went well for Tennessee this year. I still am not ready to quit on him.
I want to ask you about Isaiah Likely, because that's somebody that Kate and I have talked about a lot so far this offseason. It just feels to me like it's inevitable that he's going to become like a top 5 or top 6 tight end. It's just, how long do you have to wait? And I got to be honest, Matt, after what we saw at the end of the year and then early on in the playoffs, I'm wondering if it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And if I don't know if the Ravens are going to move on from Mark Andrews because he's still like 29 years old, but it does. I thought their offense was just better when it was Isaiah Likely playing that tight end position, because they were just so much faster and more athletic in the middle of the field. What do you think?
Yeah, I haven't given that a ton of thought, but as you were thinking about, or as you were saying that, I would assume Andrews will be back this year, of course, but it's not long before Lamar's contract becomes problematic. And, is Stanley the long-term answer at tackle? They could lose Matabuke. All of a sudden, the cap's going to start getting tight, and you wonder an offseason from now, could Andrews be had by the Bears for a second-round pick or something along those lines, with Likely waiting in the wings? I think you always bet on talent, especially a tight end. I mean, guys that produce, that move really well, sometimes it takes them a little while to grow into their paws, but he's ahead of schedule with all that.
All right, I'm going to give you the one guy that I've been trading for in every league, and I already have him in most leagues, so I can't really go out and get him. To me, it's Michael Mayer, and I don't know if this counts as a long shot tight end, but he's being drafted as tight end 18 right now. I just think back at this time last year, Matt, like the conversation was, hey, will Michael Mayer be like a top 15, top 20 pick? Is he the number 1 tight end in this class over Dalton Kincaid? He falls a little bit because of some athletic testing, still goes very early in the second round. But the quarterback situation this year in Las Vegas was awful. They had Jimmy Garoppolo start the year. He got hurt. Aiden O'Connell came in. Then they went to Brian Hoyer. Then they went back to Garoppolo. And then they went to Aiden O'Connell again. The coach got fired. Michael Mayer had 1 target in the first 4 games of the year. And then he started to play a little bit better. And then he got hurt. He's just somebody to me that, he's 22 years old. He's a former All-American. He's got the draft pedigree. He's on an offense where last year was Austin Hooper blocking him a little bit. That's not going to be the case at all. I will just be shocked if he's not like a 750-yard receiver this year. And I think the ceiling's way higher than that even. What do you think?
So I'm sure a lot of our listeners think that I am down on Mayer because I didn't have him super highly ranked in the rookie ranks last year, but that was more of a reflection of just an incredible tight end class. Like, I greatly preferred Musgrave, and I held Mayer's so testing against him probably more than I should. But I see what you're saying. I mean, it's not a difficult path to see him catching 750 yards and 8 touchdowns a year consistently. I mean, I don't
he's
think
just so much cheaper now than he was last year. I mean, we saw him being drafted as a top 12, top 13 tight end. And now you have Musgrave at tight end 13. and you've got Mayer at tight end 18. I'm not saying that they should be switched, but I just think
Maybe it should be
at that
closer.
spot, it's a big value.
And
Yeah.
I do think the fact that we were kind of spoiled with some immediate superstar production from the rest of this tight end class that, yeah, like, you might be able to find more value there in Mayer, just given the fact that there's probably going to be a little bit of comparison here, between Michael Mayer and folks pointing at Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid. Why didn't Michael Mayer do that? I think that sort of comparison in a very talented class could work in dynasty managers' favor if they are looking to target Michael Mayer on the low.
I think that's a great point, because if you look at tight end rookie seasons over the last 10 years, if you just told me what Mayer did, you'd be like, that's pretty good. It's just not as good as Kincaid and Laporta and, some of the elite ones that have happened lately.
Matt, I've got one tight end I just want to ask you about before we move on. So the Rams don't really use a tight end a ton. Tyler Higbee has been a fringe top 15, top 16 guy for a while, but he tore his ACL late in the year. I wouldn't expect him to play at least the first 6 games of the season. He seems like a prime candidate for PUP. He's also 31 years old. We saw the Rams draft Davis Allen from Clemson in the mid rounds last year. Is he somebody who, I'm not saying that you should go out and trade for, but at least someone should be like on your short list for your waiver wire? What are your thoughts there?
I don't think he should be on any waiver wires. I also think it's noteworthy, and it didn't really matter much, but when they made the trade with the Dolphins, they specifically went after Hunter Long. I mean, I don't know if he matters at all. It doesn't seem like it. I mean, they do want blockers at that position. But no, I think he should be on every waiver wire, or not be on any waiver wire, to be honest with you. And I have one other name that might just be a Super Bowl victory away from retirement, touring with Miss Swift. Is Noah Gray a top 12 tight end if Kelsey doesn't come back?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right.
That's not even a question. He's really cheap. Yeah.
And he's good. I kind of think anytime he gets targets, I'm like, oh, maybe the Chiefs should use him a little bit more. All right. We've got some more questions to get to. We will get to talking about Tyreek Hill and his dynasty value and when you should consider selling him next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. My favorite bet every year is the octopus bet, which FanDuel has, which is, will a player score a touchdown and then score the 2-point conversion on the next play? It actually hit last year with Jalen Hurts. He did that late in the fourth quarter. You always get so good of odds on that. So make sure you check it out. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for who will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. Plus, new customers, if you join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the NFL. All right, we've got one more question here from Scott. He wants to know, Matt, when should I consider trading away Tyreek Hill? I'm a little afraid of his age and his value dropping off. Right now on Dynasty League Football, he's being drafted as wide receiver 8. You look at the other wide receivers that are being drafted around him. None of the other ones are over the age of 26 years old. So what are you thinking here?
So first off, fantasy aside, I think Tyreek is one of the most underrated players in NFL history. Like, he is never talked about as the third best receiver ever. I think he's in that neighborhood. Like, okay, there's Rice. I think Moss is number 2. And then I think Tyreek's in that conversation with 2 different teams, terrifying. I mean, any defensive coordinator will tell you he's their least favorite person to play against in the entire league. So I adore him. I think he is a tremendous football player, historically underrated, but I'm getting out right now, to be very honest. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think Miami is quickly losing resources, and they have not yet paid Tua. So I think their roster as a whole could be going backwards, not forwards, just because of the quarterback situation. Their O-line needs revamped. And as great as he is, if I could turn him into one of these incoming rookie receivers or something along those lines and just get younger, I think I'm doing that now.
Let me real quick, Kate, let me just give you like an option. Would you trade Tyreek Hill for Brandon Ayuk, who's 25 years old?
I think that's all dependent on where you are at in your league. If you are in a position where maybe you won the championship this year and you're looking to run it back and your roster is in a good place to do that, I still think Tyreek Hill is a hold for, all of the production that he had. Obviously, I do think he's underrated in the overall greatness category, regardless of fantasy, but he's coming off a career high 3.72 yards per route run, career high missed forced tackles after the catch, 8 games of 100 plus receiving yards, never had a game with fewer than 40. Overall wide receiver 2 on the year. He finished as a top 5 wide receiver in 9 of 16 weeks. Like, that is some absolutely insane production at the wide receiver position. So safe for the amount of upside that he offers. So if I am in a contending window, I'm holding on to Tyreek Hill because I don't know that you can get as much value as he's going to offer your roster at this point. He's already come out to say that he wants to play and until through the 2025 season. He wants to play out his contract and he's done. So we already have the timestamp of when his usefulness is going to expire. So if your roster is in a position where you're approaching that rebuild, yes, you've got to move on. But I also think if you're in a contending window, I don't know that you're going to do much better than Tyreek Hill.
Matt, I want to run through some names that are being drafted behind Tyreek
Okay.
Hill right now in Dynasty League football. And you just tell me who you would rather have. Tyreek Hill or Chris Olave?
Olave is an easy one for me, just because the age gap is
Yep.
massive, and I think he's just scratching the surface of what he can become too. That's an easy one for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. Tyreek Hill or Devontae Smith?
See, I know we're going to get to Jalen Waddle here at one point too.
Yeah, well, he's right there, right after that. Yeah,
I know he's coming up any minute, and that's an obvious, which Dolphin do you prefer? So I think we learned a little bit of a lesson, though, and that's why I'm going with Devontae Smith, is a lot of these number 2 receivers that are great players, but they're still second on their team, didn't quite live up to the billing this year. I mean, even if it's Godwin or let alone Waddle and Devontae Smith. And so if you're a number 2 receiver on your team, I'm going to hesitate a little bit more, as opposed to the Olaves of the world and the true number 1s. So I don't know what I'd do there. I think I'd probably keep Hill.
I was going to say the only quote unquote number 2 receiver that really did break out this year was Brandon Ayuk, right? But I don't even know if you consider him a number 2 receiver because he's more of the traditional receiver and Debo is the wild card. But that's the next guy. Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver 11, coming off a really strong playoffs. Is that one close for you at all?
I think I would go with Ayuk. I think Ayuk's a phenomenal football player as well. That's ascending. That one I didn't mention on purpose because Debo's the zone beater, Ayuk's the man beater. So it depends what defense you play to say who's number 1, who's number 2. But this is the neighborhood. I mean, maybe the better question is, would you trade Hill for Neighbors or Rome? Or, one of these incoming guys. To me, I think that answer is yes.
Yeah, that's the one. It's probably going to depend on landing spot for Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors and Roma Dunze. But I'm with you. I think right around wide receiver 12, wide receiver 13 is probably where Tyreek Hill's value should be at right now. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Kate does an amazing job with the shorts. Check those out as well. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. Go listen to his million other podcasts he does. He does some amazing work for Steelers.com. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. Follow her at Pro Football Focus, Behind the Steel Curtain in Yahoo. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We're going to continue to break down some Senior Bowl stuff on Thursday and Friday. We'll get you ready for the Super Bowl next week, and make sure that you continue to download that podcast, and we will see you all back here tomorrow.